Twins fix single father's car. Then he shocks everyone by proposing to their mother. Before we begin, just know, no matter where you are in the world, I'm glad you're here. The morning sun cast long shadows across Maple Street as 7-year-old twins, Emma and Ethan Rodriguez, pressed their faces against the living room window. Their breath fogged the glass as they watched their neighbor, Mr. David Parker, standing helplessly beside his broken-down sedan, cell phone pressed to his ear. "Mama, the sad man's car is broken again," Emma whispered to her mother Maria, who was folding laundry on the couch behind them. Maria Rodriguez, 32, and perpetually tired from her double shifts as a cleaning lady at the Millbrook Medical Center, glanced up from the pile of uniforms. David Parker had moved in next door 6 months ago with his 8-year-old daughter, Sophie, and Maria had noticed how he struggled. The divorce had been finalized just last year, and now he was raising Sophie alone while working as a software engineer from home. "He looks really frustrated," Ethan observed, his 7-year-old mind already working on a solution. "Remember when Papa taught us about cars before he went to heaven?" Maria's heart clenched. Her husband Carlos had died in a construction accident 3 years ago, leaving her to raise the twins alone. He'd been teaching them basic mechanics in their tiny garage, showing them how engines worked with an old lawnmower. "Maybe we could help," Emma suggested, her dark eyes bright with determination. Outside, David hung up his phone in defeat. The tow truck couldn't come until tomorrow, and he had an important client meeting. Sophie needed to get to school, and he was already behind on his freelance projects. At 35, he felt like he was barely keeping his life together. "The battery cables look loose," Ethan said confidently, though he could barely see over the fence. Maria smiled, despite her exhaustion. Her children had inherited Carlos's mechanical intuition and his generous heart. "Go ask if he needs help, mijos, but be polite." The twins raced outside, their untied shoelaces slapping against the concrete. David looked up as 2 small figures approached, their matching Rodriguez elementary T-shirts slightly too big. "Mr. Parker, we can fix your car," Emma announced with the absolute confidence only a 7-year-old could possess. David's first instinct was to decline politely, but something in their eager faces made him pause. These were the children of the woman who'd left homemade tamales on his doorstep after Sophie had been sick, who'd never asked for anything in return. "The battery cables might be loose," Ethan added, standing on his tiptoes to peer under the hood. David blinked in surprise. The kid was actually right. He could see the corrosion from where he stood. "How do you?" "Our papa taught us before he died," Emma said matter-of-factly, the way children speak of profound truths. "He said, helping neighbors is what good people do." Something shifted in David's chest. He'd been so focused on his own struggles that he'd barely acknowledged the woman next door was raising these remarkable children alone. He popped the hood, and the twins immediately spotted the problem. "There," Ethan pointed to the loose positive cable. "Just needs to be tightened." David found a wrench in his trunk, but his hands were too large for the tight space. Emma's small fingers, however, could reach the connection easily. Under Ethan's careful direction, he'd memorized everything their father had taught them. She tightened the cable. "Now try it," Emma said, wiping her small hands on her shirt. David turned the key, and the engine roared to life. He stared at the twins in amazement. "How did you two?" "Papa always said motors just need the right connections," Ethan explained seriously. "Like people." Indeed, as David drove Sophie to school that morning, he couldn't stop thinking about those words, or about the woman who'd raised such extraordinary children. That evening, David knocked on Maria's front door, holding a bouquet of grocery store flowers and a bottle of wine. Through the screen door, he could see the twins at a small kitchen table, bent over homework under the warm glow of a single lamp. "Mr. Parker." Maria appeared, still in her blue cleaning uniform, her dark hair pulled back in a practical ponytail. "Is everything okay?" "Your children saved my day," David said, suddenly feeling foolish with his small gifts. "I wanted to thank you properly. These are for you." Maria's cheeks flushed. It had been 3 years since anyone had brought her flowers. That's very kind, but they were just being helpful. It's what Carlos taught them. Your husband sounds like he was a good man. The best, Maria said softly, taking the flowers. Their fingers brushed briefly, and she felt an unexpected flutter. Would you like some coffee? The twins would love to tell you more about what their father taught them. David found himself stepping into a world that was completely foreign to his own orderly existence. The Rodriguez home was small, but filled with warmth. Children's artwork covered the refrigerator, family photos lined the mantel, and everything smelled like cinnamon and love. Mr. Parker! Emma bounced up from her math homework. Did your car work all day? Perfectly, David said, settling onto their worn couch. You two are natural mechanics. Papa said we had good instincts. Ethan beamed. He was teaching us to fix everything. Cars, bikes, even the toaster. Over coffee that was stronger and better than anything David made himself, he learned about Carlos Rodriguez, a man who'd worked construction by day and spent evenings teaching his children that every problem had a solution, that helping others was life's greatest joy. He used to say that fixing things was like putting love back into the world, Maria said quietly, watching her children demonstrate their knowledge with animated gestures. David thought about his own sterile apartment, his lonely meals in front of the computer, his 8-year-old daughter who barely spoke about her feelings since the divorce. Sophie doesn't have memories like that with me. I'm always working, always stressed about money, about being enough for her. You moved here to give her a better life, Maria observed. That's love too. As the evening wore on, David found himself relaxing for the first time in months. The twins peppered him with questions about computers while showing him their father's tool collection, carefully maintained in a small shed behind the house. Maria moved around them with quiet grace, putting away dishes, helping with homework, somehow making it all look effortless. Papa left us instructions, Emma said, pulling out a notebook filled with Carlos's careful handwriting, for fixing lots of things. David flipped through pages of mechanical wisdom mixed with life lessons. Always check the simple things first. A loose connection can stop everything from working. The best repairs come from patient hands and caring hearts. Your father was a philosopher, David murmured. He was just Papa, Ethan said simply, but he made everything better. As David prepared to leave, Maria walked him to the door. In the porch light, he could see the exhaustion in her eyes, the way she carried the weight of everything alone. Thank you for this evening, he said. I can't remember the last time I felt so. Welcome, Maria finished softly. Their eyes met, and for a moment something unspoken passed between them. Two people carrying heavy burdens, suddenly aware they didn't have to carry them alone. Maybe Sophie could come play with the twins sometime, David suggested. She's been so quiet since the divorce. She's always welcome, Maria said. The twins could teach her about tools. Carlos always said children need to know they can fix things. As David walked back to his house, he found himself thinking not just about car repairs, but about connections, how sometimes the simplest act of reaching out could change everything. 3 weeks later, Sophie Parker sat cross-legged in the Rodriguez's garage, holding a screwdriver with the same reverence other children reserved for magic wands. The 8-year-old had barely spoken above a whisper since her parents' bitter divorce, but something about the twins' patient instruction was drawing her out of her shell. Feel how the screw wants to turn, Emma coached gently, guiding Sophie's small hand. Papa always said tools like to do their job. You just have to listen to them. They were working on an old radio Carlos had left behind, taking it apart to understand how sound traveled through wires and circuits. It was exactly the kind of project he'd designed to teach patience and wonder. Why did your papa know so much? Sophie asked quietly, her voice barely audible above the afternoon birds. Because he paid attention to everything, Ethan explained, organizing washers by size with the methodical care their father had taught them. He said the world was full of teachers if you knew how to look. David appeared in the garage doorway, briefcase in hand after a client meeting downtown. For the past 3 weeks, he'd been picking Sophie up from the Rodriguez house every evening, and each day she seemed a little brighter, a little more like the curious child she'd been before everything fell apart. "Daddy, look!" Sophie held up the radio circuit board with genuine excitement. "Emma and Ethan taught me how electricity makes music." David's throat tightened. It was the first time in months he'd heard real joy in his daughter's voice. "That's incredible, sweetheart. Mrs. Rodriguez is teaching us to make Carlos's special tamales tonight," Emma announced. "Want to stay for dinner, Mr. Parker?" "Oh, I couldn't impose," David began, but Maria appeared from the house, flour dusting her apron. "It's no imposition," she said, and David noticed how her smile reached her eyes now. "The children have been planning this all week." Over the past 3 weeks, their evening conversations had become a ritual. After the twins finished homework and Sophie completed her quiet projects, the adults would sit on Maria's small porch, sharing coffee and stories. David had learned about Maria's double shifts at the medical center, her struggles with bills, her fierce determination to give her children everything Carlos would have wanted for them. Maria had learned about David's software consulting business, his guilt over the divorce's impact on Sophie, his fear that he wasn't enough as a single parent. Slowly, carefully, they'd built something that felt like friendship, though the warm looks that passed between them suggested it was growing into something more. "Carlos's tamale recipe requires many hands," Maria explained, her dark eyes twinkling. "It's impossible to make them alone." In Maria's kitchen, David found himself elbow-deep in masa, following instructions from a stained recipe card written in Carlos's careful script. The twins directed the operation with 7-year-old authority, while Sophie giggled at David's clumsy attempts to spread the corn mixture evenly. "Papa said cooking was just another kind of fixing," Ethan explained seriously. "You take broken things, hungry people, and make them whole." "Your papa was very wise," David murmured, watching Maria's graceful movements as she prepared the filling. Everything she did seemed effortless, yet he was beginning to understand the tremendous strength it took to make it look easy. "He was," Maria agreed softly, "but wisdom doesn't pay bills or fix broken hearts." Their eyes met across the kitchen, and David felt that familiar flutter of connection. Over the weeks, he'd found himself looking forward to these evenings more than anything else in his day. Maria made him feel like he was part of something larger than his own small world of deadlines and client calls. "Mama, mister?" "And Parker's tamales look funny," Emma giggled, and indeed David's attempts were lopsided and overfilled. "They'll taste just as good," Maria said diplomatically, but her smile was warm and teasing. As they worked together, David noticed how Sophie gravitated toward Maria with a hunger that went beyond food. His daughter helped with small tasks, soaking up Maria's gentle praise and patient instruction. It struck him that Sophie needed a mother's touch as much as he needed. What? Partnership? Love? The thought should have terrified him, but instead, it felt like coming home. "Papa always said families aren't just about blood," Emma announced, matter-of-factly stirring the pot of red sauce. "They're about people who take care of each other." David caught Maria's eye again, and this time neither looked away. In the warm kitchen, filled with children's laughter and the smell of generations-old recipes, something was taking shape between them, as carefully constructed and essential as the car repairs that had first brought them together. The call came at 2:47 a.m. on a Tuesday in October. David jerked awake to his phone buzzing insistently, and Maria's panicked voice cut through his sleepiness like ice water. "David, I'm so sorry to wake you, but Emma has a fever of 103 and my car won't start. The hospital said to bring her in right away, and I don't know who else to call." David was pulling on clothes before she finished speaking. "I'll be right there. Don't apologize." He found Maria in her driveway, still in her pajamas, holding a flushed and listless Emma, while Ethan clung to her other side. The 7-year-old's usual bright chatter had been replaced by labored breathing that made David's chest tighten with fear. "The engine won't even turn over," Maria said, her voice shaking. I don't have money for a taxi to the hospital, and the ambulance would cost— Get in my car, David interrupted gently. Sophie's still asleep. I'll carry Emma. At Millbrook General's emergency room, David watched Maria pace the waiting area like a caged lioness, while Ethan sat pressed against his side, unusually quiet. The boy's small hand found David's larger one, and David was struck by how natural it felt to offer comfort to this child who wasn't his own. "Mama's scared," Ethan whispered. "She gets really scared when we're sick because Papa died in a hospital." David's heart clenched. In all their evening conversations, Maria had never mentioned that detail. "Your mama's strong, buddy, and Emma's going to be fine." "I know," Ethan said with 7-year-old confidence. "But Mama doesn't always remember how strong she is." 3 hours later, Emma emerged from the treatment room with a much lower fever and a diagnosis of strep throat. Serious, but treatable with antibiotics. Maria's relief was so profound, she nearly collapsed, and David found himself catching her, holding her steady as weeks of careful boundaries suddenly seemed irrelevant. "I was so scared," she whispered against his shoulder. "I can't lose them too. I can't." "You won't," David said firmly, his arms tightening around her. "You're an incredible mother, Maria. Carlos would be so proud." As they drove home in the pre-dawn darkness, Emma sleeping peacefully in Maria's lap, and Ethan curled up next to David, something fundamental had shifted between them. The careful dance they'd been performing for weeks, friendly neighbors, grateful acquaintances, had been stripped away by crisis, revealing something much deeper. "I don't know how to thank you," Maria said softly as they pulled into her driveway. "You don't need to thank me," David replied, turning to face her. "This is what people who care about each other do." The words hung in the air between them, heavy with unspoken meaning. Maria's eyes searched his face in the dashboard's dim glow, and David held his breath, wondering if he'd said too much too soon. "David," she began, then stopped, seeming to gather courage. "These past weeks, having you and Sophie in our lives, it's been—" "I know," he said softly, "for me too." Later that morning, after Maria had called in sick to the medical center and settled Emma in bed with juice and children's television, David returned with Sophie and a bag of groceries. "We brought soup," Sophie announced importantly, carrying a container from the deli, "and juice boxes and crackers that aren't too salty." "That's very thoughtful," Maria said, touched by the 8-year-old's care. "Sophie insisted on picking everything herself," David explained. "She wanted to make sure it was exactly what sick people need." As the day wore on, David found himself moving through Maria's house with increasing ease, brewing tea, reading stories to the twins, helping Sophie with homework at the kitchen table. When Maria emerged from Emma's room looking exhausted, she found him folding laundry on her couch. "You don't have to do that," she protested weakly. "I want to help," David said simply. "Let me help." That evening, as Emma slept peacefully and Ethan played quietly with his toy cars, David and Maria sat on her porch swing, sharing a cup of coffee and watching Sophie chase fireflies in the gathering dusk. "I haven't depended on anyone since Carlos died," Maria said quietly. "I was afraid to. I haven't wanted to be needed by anyone since my divorce," David admitted. "I was afraid I'd fail again." They sat in comfortable silence, the weight of their honesty settling between them like a bridge finally built across uncertain waters. "The twins love you," Maria said eventually. "And Sophie, she lights up around you in a way she hasn't since Carlos died." "Sophie adores you," David replied. "She needs what you give her. That gentle confidence, that sense of belonging to something bigger than just me and my mistakes." Maria reached for his hand, her fingers intertwining with his as naturally as breathing. "Maybe we don't have to do this alone anymore." The November morning dawned crisp and clear, perfect for the Millbrook Elementary School Fall Festival. David had volunteered to help with the ring toss booth, while Maria was managing the face-painting station with her characteristic efficiency and warmth. The twins and Sophie had been planning their festival strategy for weeks, determined to win enough tickets for the giant stuffed elephant in the prize booth. "Mr. Parker, your rings are crooked," Emma called out, her face painted with butterfly wings in brilliant blue and silver. Her strep throat was long-healed, but the experience had somehow made her even more spirited, as if she'd proven to herself that she could survive anything. David looked down at his setup and laughed. Emma was right. His rings were scattered haphazardly around the bottles. "I could use some expert consultation," he called back. Within minutes, both twins had abandoned their festival plans to help reorganize his booth. Ethan lined up the bottles with mathematical precision, while Emma tested the ring weights, applying the same methodical approach their father had taught them for mechanical problems. "Papa always said anything worth doing was worth doing right," Ethan explained to a line of waiting children. "Even games." David watched them work, marveling at how these 7-year-olds could make him feel simultaneously humble and proud. They weren't his children, but over the past 2 months they'd become essential to his understanding of what family could mean. "You're lucky to have such good helpers," commented Janet Morrison, the school principal, as she approached the booth. "The Rodriguez twins are special children. Their mother has done a remarkable job raising them alone." "Ah, Maria is incredible," David agreed, his eyes finding her across the playground. She was patiently painting a Spider-Man mask on a squirming 5-year-old while somehow managing to keep track of 3 other children waiting their turn. "And Sophie seems so much happier lately," Janet continued, with the pointed interest of someone who'd watched too many children struggle through their parents' divorces. "She's been participating more in class, making friends. Whatever changes you've made at home are working." David felt a warm flush of pride mixed with something deeper. The changes weren't just at his home. They were in his heart, in his understanding of what it meant to be part of something bigger than his own small world. "The Martinez family has been very welcoming," he said carefully, not yet ready to put words to the feelings growing between him and Maria. "Oh, Rodriguez," Janet corrected gently. "Maria Rodriguez. Though I can see how you might get confused, you've been spending so much time together that people are starting to talk." David's stomach flipped. "Talk?" "In the best way," Janet assured him quickly. "Millbrook loves a good love story, especially one involving such wonderful children. Everyone's been hoping Maria would find someone who appreciates what a treasure she is." Before David could respond, disaster struck at the face-painting station. A child had knocked over the water jar, sending muddy paint water cascading across the table and onto Maria's white volunteer t-shirt. She jumped back with a small cry of surprise, then immediately began apologizing to the disappointed children in line. "I'll be right back," David told the twins, who nodded seriously and took over ring toss duties with professional competence. He reached Maria's station just as she was trying to salvage paint supplies with paper towels. Her shirt was soaked and she looked close to tears, not from the mess, but from the thought of disappointing the children who'd been waiting patiently for their turn. "Hey," David said softly, taking the soggy paper towels from her hands. "It's okay. These things happen. But the kids." Maria gestured helplessly at the line of small painted faces. "We'll understand," David finished, "and I brought an extra shirt in my car. Sophie spilled juice this morning. It might be big on you, but it's clean." As Maria changed in the school bathroom, David organized the remaining paint supplies and explained to the waiting children that there would be a short delay. To his surprise, several parents stepped forward to help clean up, and one mother who was an art teacher offered to take over painting duties. "This is what community looks like," said Mrs. Henderson, whose twin boys were in Emma and Ethan's class. "People helping people. Your girlfriend is lucky to have someone who jumps in when things go wrong." "She's not my—" David began, then stopped. Why was he correcting her? What was he so afraid of admitting? When Maria emerged wearing his oversized button-down shirt, rolled up at the sleeves, David felt something shift permanently in his chest. She looked beautiful and vulnerable and absolutely perfect, and he realized with startling clarity that he was falling in love with her. "Better?" she asked, smoothing down the shirt self-consciously. "Perfect," David said, and meant it. They spent the rest of the festival working side by side, Maria finishing face painting while David managed the cleanup and crowd control. The twins and Sophie had apparently formed an alliance, pooling their tickets and coordinating their game strategy with military precision. "They're quite a team," Maria observed, watching the three children celebrate winning enough tickets for not just the elephant, but matching smaller prizes for each of them. "They are," David agreed. Then, before he could lose his courage, he added, "Maria, would you like to have dinner with me? Just us, I mean, a real date." Maria's eyes widened slightly, and for a terrifying moment, David thought he'd misread everything between them. Then her face broke into a smile that made his heart race. "I thought you'd never ask," she said softly. "Yes, David, I'd love to." As they watched their children celebrate their festival victories, David felt like he was finally winning something too, the chance at a future he'd never dared to imagine. The restaurant David chose for their first official date was a small Italian place 20 miles from Millbrook, far enough to feel special, close enough that Maria didn't worry about being too far from the twins, who were having their first sleepover at David's apartment with Sophie. Maria had borrowed a dress from her sister Carmen, a deep blue that brought out her eyes and made her feel beautiful in a way she'd almost forgotten. David wore a suit he hadn't touched since his divorce proceedings, but tonight it felt like armor for a different kind of battle, the terrifying, wonderful fight to open his heart again. "I haven't been on a real date in 4 years," Maria confessed over wine and candlelight, her hands nervously smoothing the unfamiliar fabric of her skirt. "I haven't wanted to be on one in 2 years, David admitted. "But sitting here with you, I can't remember why I was so afraid." They talked about everything and nothing. Maria's dreams of maybe going back to school someday, David's plans to expand his consulting business, their shared worry about raising children in an uncertain world. But underneath the conversation ran a current of deeper recognition, the sense that they were finally allowing themselves to want something they'd both given up on. "Carlos used to say that love was like fixing a broken machine," Maria said softly, twirling pasta around her fork. "You have to be patient, careful, willing to try different approaches. And sometimes you have to take everything apart before you can put it back together properly." "Sounds like he was talking about more than engines," David observed. "He was talking about us," Maria smiled sadly. "We were so young when we married, barely 20. We had to learn how to love each other, how to be partners. It took years to get it right." David reached across the table to touch her hand. "I married my ex-wife because it seemed like the logical next step. Graduate college, get a job, find a suitable wife, have children. I never learned how to actually build a life with someone." "And now?" Maria asked quietly. "Now I want to learn," David said, his thumb tracing circles on her palm. "With you. If you're willing to be patient with a man who's never done any of this right." Maria's eyes filled with tears, but she was smiling. "I think we've both earned the right to take our time, figure things out together." They drove home slowly, neither wanting the evening to end. At Maria's front door, David walked her to the porch but didn't assume an invitation inside. Instead, they stood in the soft glow of the porch light, the air between them electric with possibility. "Thank you for tonight," Maria said, "for making me feel like Maria, not just Mama or the cleaning lady or the widow, just me. Thank you for letting me see who you really are," David replied. "You're extraordinary, Maria Rodriguez." When he leaned down to kiss her, it was soft and careful and full of promise. Maria's hands found the lapels of his suit jacket, holding on as if he might disappear, and David understood the feeling completely. "I should check on the children," Maria whispered against his lips, but she didn't move away. "They're fine," David murmured. "Sophie texted me 3 updates, complete with photos of Emma, teaching them both to braid friendship bracelets." "Emma doesn't know how to braid," Maria laughed. "Apparently she does now. Your daughter is resourceful." They kissed again, longer this time, and David felt the last walls around his heart crumble completely. This woman, these children, this complicated, beautiful life they were building together. It was worth any risk. "David," Maria said softly, her forehead resting against his, "I need you to know. I loved Carlos completely. He'll always be part of me, part of the twins. If we do this, if we try to build something together, he'll always be welcome," David said firmly. "Carlos made you who you are, gave you those incredible children. I could never ask you to put that away. And your divorce? Your fears about failing again? Still there," David admitted honestly. "But not as loud as my hope, not as strong as what I feel for you." They stood holding each other on the small porch, surrounded by the sounds of their neighborhood, settling into sleep, and both knew they'd crossed a line from which there was no going back. "One more thing," Maria said, pulling back to look at him seriously. "The twins have to come first, always, and Sophie needs to be okay with whatever this becomes." "Our children come first," David corrected gently. "All of them. We figure this out together, or we don't figure it out at all." Maria's smile was radiant. "Our children. I like how that sounds." Liam, as David drove home, he found himself thinking about Carlos Rodriguez's wisdom. Sometimes you had to take everything apart before you could put it back together properly. His old life was definitely in pieces, but what he and Maria were building from those pieces felt stronger, more honest, more real than anything he'd ever known. At his apartment, he found 3 children fast asleep on his living room floor, surrounded by craft supplies and the evidence of an epic friendship bracelet manufacturing session. Sophie had her arms around both twins, and Emma was clutching a bracelet that spelled out family in purple and gold beads. David smiled and reached for his phone to text Maria. "They figured it out before we did." Her response came immediately. "Children always know what the heart wants first." December arrived with the first real snowfall Millbrook had seen in 3 years. David stood at his kitchen window, watching Maria scrape ice from her windshield in the pre-dawn darkness, preparing for another double shift at the medical center. Her old Honda was struggling in the cold, the engine making concerning noises that reminded him why the twins had first entered his life. Over the past month, their relationship had deepened into something that felt both natural and miraculous. They'd had 5 more official dates, countless family dinners, and endless evening conversations that stretched long past the children's bedtimes. But they were still maintaining separate homes, still moving carefully around the question of what came next. "Daddy, Mrs. Rodriguez's car sounds sick," Sophie observed, joining him at the window. At 8, she'd developed an ear for mechanical problems that would have made Carlos proud. "It does," David agreed, already reaching for his coat. "Want to help me take a look?" Outside, Maria looked up from her futile scraping with exhausted frustration. "I'm going to be late again," she sighed. "This stupid car." "Pop the hood," David said gently, appearing beside her with his toolbox. "Sophie thinks she knows what's wrong." "The alternator belt is slipping," Sophie announced with confidence that surprised even David. "Emma and Ethan taught me the different sounds engines make when they're unhappy." Indeed, the belt was loose and frayed, probably damaged by the cold snap. David could tighten it temporarily, but it would need replacement soon, another expense Maria couldn't afford. "I can fix this for now," David said. "But Maria, this car isn't going to last much longer. The transmission's been slipping, the brakes are soft, and now the alternator system is failing." Maria's shoulders sagged. "I know, but I can't afford car payments, and I need it to get to work." "What if we shared?" David asked suddenly, the idea forming as he spoke. "I work from home most days. You could use my car for work and I'd take this one for local errands until we can figure out something better." "I can't ask you to do that," Maria protested, but David could see the relief in her eyes. "You're not asking, I'm offering. Partners help each other, right?" The word hung between them, heavy with implication. They'd been dancing around the question of what they were becoming, but crisis had a way of forcing honesty. "Partners," Maria repeated softly, her breath visible in the cold air. "Is that what we are?" Before David could answer, the twins burst from their house, bundled in mismatched winter coats and carrying thermoses of hot chocolate. "Mama, you forgot your coffee," Emma called, then stopped short at seeing David under the hood of their car. "Oh, are you fixing it again?" "Mr. Parker's being very kind," Maria said, accepting the thermos gratefully. "Papa used to say cars were like people," Ethan observed seriously. "Sometimes they just need extra help when it's cold." David met Maria's eyes over the engine. "Your papa was right about a lot of things." That evening, as they sat in Maria's living room watching the children build an elaborate blanket fort, Maria brought up the car situation again. "I've been thinking about what you said this morning," she began carefully, "about being partners." David's heart rate picked up. "And I've been independent for 3 years. It's been important to me, proving I could take care of my children alone. But watching you with them, seeing how Sophie has blossomed, how the twins light up when you're around." She paused, gathering courage. "Maybe independence isn't the same thing as isolation." "What are you saying?" David asked softly. "I'm saying maybe it's time to stop being so careful. Maybe it's time to see what we could build together, really together." From inside the blanket fort came Sophie's voice. "Emma, do you think your mom and my dad are going to get married?" "I hope so," Emma replied matter-of-factly. "Then we'd be real sisters." "We're already real sisters," Ethan corrected. "Marriage just makes it official." David and Maria looked at each other and started laughing. The kind of helpless laughter that comes from realizing children have been 3 steps ahead all along. The conversation David had been dreading came on a snowy Saturday morning in January. His ex-wife Rachel called while he was making pancakes with all 3 children, her voice sharp with the particular anger she reserved for anything that threatened her narrative of their failed marriage. "I hear you're playing house with the cleaning lady next door," Rachel said without preamble. "Sophie mentioned her new, almost siblings during our last phone call." David stepped into his bedroom, closing the door on the children's chatter. "Her name is Maria Rodriguez. And yes, we're dating. Sophie is happy, Rachel. Happier than she's been since the divorce. Happy with some stranger's children. David, you can barely handle 1 child and now you're thinking about taking on 3 more. And what kind of example are you setting, shacking up with someone Sophie barely knows?" "Sophie knows Maria very well," David said calmly, though his jaw was tight. "And Maria's children aren't strangers. They're the reason I met her in the first place. They fixed my car when I was stranded." "Children fixed your car?" Rachel's voice rose incredulously. "You're letting untrained children mess with vehicles? That's exactly the kind of irresponsible—" "They're not untrained," David interrupted. "Their father taught them before he died. They're remarkable kids, Rachel, and they've been incredible friends to Sophie." "Their father died? So you're getting involved with a widow and her charity cases? David, think about what you're doing. Sophie needs stability, not more upheaval." The words hit harder than David expected, mainly because they echoed his own deepest fears. Was he being selfish, pursuing his own happiness at Sophie's expense? Was he taking on more than he could handle? "Sophie is stable," David said firmly. "She's thriving. Her grades are up, she's made friends, she's laughing again. Maria and her children have given her something I couldn't give her alone. A sense of belonging to a real family." "A family? David, you met this woman 4 months ago. You don't build families in 4 months. You don't build them in 4 years either," David shot back, thinking of their own cold, carefully arranged marriage. "Rachel, I'm not asking for your permission. I'm telling you out of courtesy. Sophie is my daughter and I'm going to do what's best for her." "We'll see about that," Rachel said coldly. "My lawyer will be very interested in this development." The line went dead, leaving David staring at his phone with a growing sense of dread. He could hear the children in the kitchen laughing over something Emma had said, and the sound should have been comforting. Instead, it felt fragile, threatened. When he returned to the kitchen, Maria took one look at his face and immediately began shepherding the children toward the living room. "Why don't you 3 finish that puzzle while I help Mr. Parker with breakfast?" Once they were alone, she turned to him with concern. "What happened?" "Rachel knows about us, about you and the twins. She's not pleased." Maria's face went carefully neutral. "What did she say?" David hesitated, then decided on honesty. She thinks I can't handle more children. She called you and the twins charity cases. She threatened to involve her lawyer. For a moment, Maria was silent, and David could see her retreating behind the protective walls she'd built during 3 years of single motherhood. Maybe she has a point, Maria said quietly. We have been moving fast. And Sophie is your priority. Sophie is one of my priorities, David corrected firmly, moving closer. But so are you. So are Emma and Ethan. Maria, don't let Rachel's poison get into your head. It's not poison if it's true, Maria replied, her voice small. I am a cleaning lady. My children and I are a lot to take on. Maybe Sophie would be better off with just you, without the complications we bring. David felt a surge of protective anger, not at Maria, but at the world that had taught her to make herself smaller, to doubt her own worth. Look at me, he said, taking her hands. You are not a complication. You're not charity. You're the strongest, most incredible woman I've ever known, and your children are extraordinary. Rachel is angry because she can see what I've found with you, something real, something that makes Sophie glow with happiness. But if she takes Sophie away, she won't, David said with more confidence than he felt. Sophie is thriving. Any court would see that. And Maria, even if the worst happened, even if everything fell apart, I wouldn't regret loving you. I wouldn't regret this. From the living room came the sound of the children cheering. Apparently they'd finished their puzzle. Maria looked toward the sound, then back at David's determined face. Promise me something, she said finally. Promise me that if this gets too complicated, if it starts hurting Sophie, you'll tell me. Promise you won't sacrifice her happiness for mine. I promise, David said solemnly. But Maria, you need to promise me something too. Promise you won't run at the first sign of trouble. Promise you'll fight for us. Maria was quiet for a long moment, then nodded slowly. I promised to try. It wasn't everything David wanted to hear, but it was enough, for now. Valentine's Day fell on a Tuesday, and David had been planning for weeks. Not just dinner reservations or flowers, but something bigger. A gesture that would show Maria and the children exactly how committed he was to their future together, despite Rachel's ongoing legal threats. The past month had been tense. Rachel's lawyer had indeed made inquiries, requesting character references and demanding increased visitation time. David's own lawyer assured him that Sophie's obvious happiness was his strongest defense, but the uncertainty hung over them all like a cloud. Maria had been quieter, more careful, second-guessing every interaction with Sophie as if she were being watched and judged, which, David realized, she probably was. But tonight was about hope, not fear. Where are we going exactly? Maria asked, as David drove them away from Millbrook toward the city. The children were having a sleepover at Carmen's house, giving them a rare evening completely alone. You'll see, David said mysteriously, but I should warn you, I've been planning this for a while. The "this" turned out to be a small art gallery in downtown Indianapolis, where Maria's sister Carmen had secretly submitted several of Maria's drawings from high school, sketches she'd found in a box while helping clean Carlos's things from the garage. David, what is this? Maria gasped as they walked into the gallery's warm lighting and saw her own artwork displayed on professional easels, matted and framed with small placards bearing her name. Your sister thought you should see what your art looks like when it's given the respect it deserves, David explained. These were hidden in a box for 14 years, Maria. But look at them. Really look. You have incredible talent. Maria moved from drawing to drawing in stunned silence. There were portraits of Carlos from when they were teenagers, landscapes of the Indiana countryside, detailed sketches of children playing, all showing a natural eye for composition and a delicate touch with pencil and charcoal. I drew these when I was 18, she whispered, before the twins, before everything. I'd forgotten how much I loved it. Carmen says you stopped drawing when Carlos died. Said you packed everything away because it reminded you of the dreams you'd had together. We were going to travel, Maria said softly, stopping in front of a drawing of the Chicago skyline she'd created from memory. Carlos was going to finish his engineering degree, and I was going to study art. We had it all planned out, and then the twins came, and that was wonderful, but expensive. And then Carlos got hurt, and you put your dreams away to take care of everyone else," David finished. "But Maria, dreams don't die just because they get delayed." He led her to a quiet corner where the gallery owner had set up a small table with champagne and strawberries. But that wasn't the surprise that made Maria's breath catch. On the table was a box containing a complete set of professional art supplies. Pencils, charcoals, papers, and sketch pads that must have cost more than Maria made in a week. "David, I can't accept this," she began, but he shook his head. "It's not a gift, it's an investment. In your talent, in your future. Maria, I've watched you these past months, seen how you light up when the twins draw, how you unconsciously sketch on napkins while we talk. You need this part of yourself back. But when would I even use them? Between work and the children, and now us. We'll make time," David said firmly. "I'll take the kids on Saturday mornings so you can draw, or Sunday afternoons, or whenever you want. Partners support each other's dreams, remember?" Maria's eyes filled with tears. "You really think I'm good enough?" "I think you're good enough for anything you want to be. But more than that, I think you deserve to find out what you're capable of when someone believes in you completely." They spent the next hour walking through the small exhibit, Maria seeing her younger self's work through adult eyes, David watching her rediscover a piece of herself she'd thought was lost forever. "There's something else," David said as they prepared to leave. "Something I need to tell you, and I want to say it here, surrounded by proof of what you're capable of." Maria turned to face him, and David took her hands, his heart pounding with the weight of what he was about to say. "I love you," he said simply. "I love your strength, your kindness, your incredible children, your hidden dreams, and your terrible coffee. I love the way you make Sophie feel like she belongs somewhere. I love how Emma and Ethan have taught me that fixing things is about much more than tools and engines. David," Maria's voice was barely a whisper, "I love you, and I want to build a life with you. A real life, not just dating or being neighbors who help each other out. I want us to be a family, officially and permanently." Maria's tears were falling freely now. "I love you too. God, David, I love you so much it scares me. But what about Rachel? What about the legal troubles?" "Then we'll face them together," David said. "Maria Rodriguez, will you marry me?" He didn't have a ring. That would come later, chosen together. But he had something better, absolute certainty that this woman was his future, and the courage to claim that future despite every obstacle. "Yes," Maria whispered, then louder, "Yes, David Parker, I will marry you." As they kissed in the gallery surrounded by Maria's forgotten dreams, both knew they were about to face the biggest challenge of their relationship. But they also knew they wouldn't face it alone. The call from Rachel's lawyer came 3 days after David and Maria's engagement, and it was worse than David's worst fears. Rachel wasn't just seeking increased visitation. She was filing for full custody of Sophie, claiming that David's unstable living situation and irresponsible decision to expose his daughter to unvetted individuals made him unfit as a primary parent. "She's using our engagement against us," David told Maria as they sat in his lawyer's office. Susan Chen's face grave as she reviewed the filing. "She's saying I'm prioritizing my love life over Sophie's well-being." "The timing is unfortunate," Susan agreed. 4 months from first meeting to engagement does appear rushed to an outside observer. "And Ms. Rodriguez, I have to ask, have you had any background checks, any formal childcare training?" "I clean hospital rooms for a living," Maria said quietly. "I've raised my children alone for 3 years. What other qualifications do I need?" Susan's expression softened. "I'm not questioning your fitness as a mother. But legally, Rachel's team will argue that David has essentially moved 3 strangers into his daughter's life without proper vetting. They'll paint it as reckless." "Sophie loves Maria and the twins," David protested. "She's never been happier. That may not matter if Rachel can convince a judge that you acted impulsively. David, I need to ask, are you prepared for the possibility that you might lose primary custody? Because if Rachel succeeds, she could potentially limit your access to weekends only. The room fell silent, except for the sound of Maria's sharp intake of breath. David felt like the ground was shifting beneath his feet. There has to be something we can do, he said finally. There is, Susan replied, but you're not going to like it. The strongest defense would be to slow down your relationship. Put the wedding on hold, maintain separate residences for at least a year, demonstrate that you're not letting romance cloud your judgment about Sophie's needs. Absolutely not, David said immediately. I'm not going to pretend I don't love Maria because my ex-wife is vindictive. David, Maria said softly, her voice carefully controlled. Maybe we should consider it. He turned to stare at her in shock. Maria, no. We're not letting her manipulate us like this. It's not manipulation if it protects Sophie, Maria replied, though her voice was breaking. David, what if we lose? What if our rushing into this costs you your daughter? What if living our lives in fear costs us everything that matters? David shot back. Maria, I won't hide what we have. I won't teach Sophie that love is something to be ashamed of. Susan cleared her throat. There is another option. If you're determined to move forward, we need character witnesses, teachers, neighbors, family, friends who can testify to Sophie's happiness and your fitness as parents. We need documented evidence that this arrangement is beneficial to Sophie, not harmful. I can get references from the school, David said immediately. Sophie's teacher, the principal, her guidance counselor. What about from the medical center? Susan asked Maria. Supervisors, colleagues who can speak to your character. Doctor, Patterson has known me for 5 years, Maria said slowly. And Nancy Williams, the head of housekeeping. They might. Good. We'll also need testimony about the children's relationship. Emma and Ethan. How has their connection to David affected them? Are they thriving or struggling with this new dynamic? For the first time since entering the office, Maria smiled slightly. They're thriving. Their grades are up. They're more confident. They talk about David like he's their father, Susan finished. That's powerful testimony, Maria. A man who steps into a fatherly role with children who aren't biologically his and succeeds, that speaks to character, not recklessness. Driving home in heavy silence, David finally spoke. You're reconsidering, aren't you? I'm terrified, Maria admitted. David, what if I'm the reason you lose Sophie? I couldn't live with that. Oh, and I couldn't live with losing you because we were too scared to fight for what we have, David replied. Maria, look at what we've built. Look at how happy the children are. Are we really going to let Rachel destroy that because she can't stand seeing me happy? They pulled into David's driveway to find all 3 children in the front yard, building a snowman that looked remarkably like Carlos, complete with a tool belt made from Emma's jump rope and a baseball cap they'd somehow convinced to stay on the snowman's head. Look, Daddy, Sophie called out, running to them with snow-covered mittens. We made Grandpa Carlos. Emma said he would have loved to see us all together. He would have, Ethan confirmed seriously. Papa always said family wasn't about blood, it was about love. David met Maria's eyes over Sophie's excited chatter and saw his own determination reflected there. These children, all 3 of them, deserved parents who would fight for their happiness, not sacrifice it to fear. We're not backing down, David said quietly. No, Maria agreed, watching Sophie and the twins add finishing touches to their snow Carlos. We're not. But privately, both wondered if love would be enough to win the fight ahead. The hearing was scheduled for March 15th, giving them 6 weeks to prepare their defense. During that time, their small house became a fortress of documentation, report cards, teacher evaluations, medical records, and character references that painted a picture of 3 children thriving in an unconventional but loving family structure. Janet Morrison, the elementary school principal, had been their first and strongest advocate. In 23 years of education, she wrote, I have rarely seen such a positive transformation in a child as I've witnessed in Sophie Parker. Her academic performance has improved dramatically. She's developed meaningful friendships, and she exhibits the confidence and security of a child who knows she is deeply loved. Dr. Patricia Patterson from the medical center provided equally strong support for Maria. Mrs. Rodriguez has been a model employee for 5 years. She's reliable, compassionate, and respected by all staff. The changes in her personal happiness over the past months have only made her an even more positive presence at work. But the most powerful testimony came from an unexpected source. Mrs. Chen. David answered his phone on a Tuesday evening in early March, surprised to hear from his lawyer outside business hours. "David, I just received a call from someone named Carmen Rodriguez. She says she's Maria's sister." "She is? What did she want?" "To testify on your behalf. But David, what she told me, you need to hear this directly from her." The next evening, Carmen sat in David's living room while the children played in the next room, her usually cheerful demeanor replaced by serious determination. "I should have done this months ago," she began, "but Maria made me promise not to interfere. She's always been proud, always insisted on handling things herself." "Ooh, Carmen, what are you talking about?" Maria asked, worry creeping into her voice. "The accident reports," Carmen said quietly, "from when Carlos died. Maria, you never read them completely, did you? You were too grief-stricken, too overwhelmed with the twins." "I read enough," Maria said defensively. "Carlos fell from scaffolding. The safety equipment failed." "Yes, but did you know that 3 other workers testified that Carlos had identified the faulty equipment the day before, that he'd reported it to the supervisor and was told the job couldn't wait for replacements?" David felt something cold settle in his stomach. "Carmen, what are you saying?" "I'm saying Carlos's death wasn't just an accident. The construction company was negligent, possibly criminally so, but they settled quickly, quietly, for a fraction of what Maria and the twins deserved. She was so overwhelmed, so scared about money, that she accepted the first offer." "Carmen, why are you telling us this now?" Maria's voice was barely a whisper. "Because Rachel's lawyer has been digging into your background. They're trying to paint you as someone who takes advantage of men for financial support. They don't know about the settlement, but they're building a narrative about a poor cleaning lady who trapped a successful software engineer." "Ah, that's ridiculous," David said angrily. "Of course it is. But Maria, if they knew the truth about Carlos's death, about what you're really entitled to, it would destroy their argument completely. You're not financially dependent on David. You're a woman who was cheated out of a substantial settlement and who's been supporting her family through her own hard work." Maria was quiet for a long moment, processing. "How substantial?" "I had a lawyer friend look into it quietly. Conservative estimate? The original settlement should have been at least 10 times what you received. Maria, you could sue. You could have financial security, independence, your own home." "Why didn't you tell me this 3 years ago?" Maria asked, her voice thick with emotion. "Because you were barely functioning. You were grieving, traumatized, focused on just surviving. I thought I was protecting you from more legal battles, more stress." David reached for Maria's hand, his mind racing. "Maria, this changes everything. If you're financially independent, Rachel can't claim you're after my money. And more than that, you deserve justice for what they did to Carlos. I don't want Carlos's death to become a weapon in our custody battle," Maria said firmly. "That's not what he would have wanted." "But Maria," Carmen pressed gently, "what would he have wanted for you and the twins? Would he have wanted you working double shifts and worrying about car repairs when there's money sitting in some corporation's account that rightfully belongs to his children?" From the kitchen came the sound of Sophie's laughter as Emma apparently told one of her elaborate stories. The sound of children who felt safe, loved, secure in their world. "I need time to think," Maria said finally. "We don't have much time," David reminded her. "The hearing is in 2 weeks. Then we have 2 weeks to decide what kind of people we want to be," Maria replied. "What kind of example we want to set for our children." That night, after Carmen left and the children were asleep, David and Maria sat on her porch swing, despite the March chill, both lost in thought. "If I pursue this lawsuit," Maria said finally, "it won't be about the custody battle. It'll be about justice for Carlos, about securing the twins' future. And if you don't pursue it, and then we face Rachel with what we have: love, commitment, and the testimony of people who've watched our children thrive." David was quiet for a moment. "What do you think Carlos would want you to do?" Maria smiled sadly. "Carlos would want me to fix what's broken. He always said that's what you do when you love someone. You fix what's broken so they can move forward. Then we know what we have to do." "Both things," Maria said firmly. "We pursue justice for Carlos, and we fight for our family. Not because one helps the other, but because both are right." As they sat holding hands in the cold night air, both knew they were about to enter the most challenging period of their relationship. But they also knew they would enter it together, with nothing to hide and everything to fight for. The courtroom was smaller than David had expected, but the weight of what hung in the balance made it feel enormous. Rachel sat with her lawyer at one table, her expression coldly confident. David, Maria, and Susan Chen occupied the other, with a stack of documents and character references that represented months of their lives laid bare for judgment. Judge Margaret Crawford was a woman in her 60s with kind eyes and a reputation for fairness, particularly in cases involving children's welfare. She'd reviewed all the preliminary filings, but today would determine Sophie's future. "Your Honor," Rachel's lawyer began, "we're here because Mr. Parker has demonstrated a pattern of impulsive decision-making that puts his daughter's stability at risk. He became involved with Ms. Rodriguez just 4 months ago, yet has already moved toward marriage and blended family living, without proper consideration for 8-year-old Sophie's needs." David felt Maria's hand squeeze his under the table as the lawyer continued painting their love story as reckless endangerment. "Furthermore, Ms. Rodriguez, while clearly devoted to her own children, lacks any formal training in child development. Mr. Parker has essentially turned his daughter's care over to a stranger." "Objection," Susan said calmly. "Ms. Rodriguez is not caring for Sophie. She's building a relationship with her. And the characterization of her as a stranger ignores months of documented positive interaction." "Sustained," Judge Crawford said. "Continue, but stick to facts, not characterizations." The next hour was grueling. Rachel's lawyer presented their case methodically. David's quick engagement, the sudden introduction of 3 new people into Sophie's life, the disruption of moving from a 2-parent household to this experimental arrangement. Then Susan stood for their defense. "Your Honor, we have extensive documentation showing that Sophie Parker has not been harmed by her father's relationship with Ms. Rodriguez. She has thrived. Her grades have improved from C's to A's and B's. Her teacher reports increased confidence and social engagement. Her counselor notes a dramatic improvement in her emotional regulation." Susan began calling witnesses. Janet Morrison testified about Sophie's transformation. Dr. Patterson spoke to Maria's character and stability. 2 of David's clients vouched for his professional reliability and devotion to his daughter. But the moment that changed everything came when Susan called an unexpected witness. "Your Honor, I'd like to call Emma Rodriguez to the stand." "Objection," Rachel's lawyer said immediately. "The child is only 7 years old." "Your Honor, this case is fundamentally about children's welfare. Emma has been directly affected by the relationship in question and is old enough to speak to her own experience." Judge Crawford considered. "I'll allow brief testimony, but I reserve the right to stop if the child becomes distressed." Emma walked to the witness stand with the same confidence she'd shown when fixing David's car that first morning. She wore her best dress and had insisted Maria braid her hair with the ribbon Sophie had given her for Christmas. "Emma," Susan said gently, "do you know why we're here today?" "Yes," Emma said clearly. "Some people think Mr. Parker shouldn't marry my mama because it might be bad for Sophie, but that's silly." "Why is it silly?" "Because Sophie was sad before and now she's happy. When people are sad, you help them. When they're happy, you don't take that away." "How do you know Sophie was sad before?" "She told me. She said after her mom and dad got divorced, she felt like she didn't belong anywhere. But now she says she belongs with all of us. Susan glanced at her notes. Emma, has having Mr. Parker and Sophie in your life been good or bad for you and your brother? Good, Emma said without hesitation. Mr. Parker teaches us things Papa can't teach us anymore, but he doesn't try to replace Papa. And Sophie is like the sister we never had. Ethan says we're a family now, just a bigger one. One more question, Emma. If the judge said Mr. Parker and your mama couldn't get married, how would that make you feel? Emma thought seriously for a moment, sad and confused. Because when something is broken, you're supposed to fix it, not break it more. We were all a little broken before, but together we work better. Papa always said that's how you know a repair is good, when everything works better than before. Rachel's lawyer had no questions for Emma, perhaps recognizing that cross-examining a 7-year-old about love and family would only reinforce their points. The final testimony came from an unexpected source. Judge Crawford looked at her notes and said, I see we have a written statement from Sophie Parker herself. Mr. Parker, your daughter asked to address the court. David's heart stopped. Your Honor, I didn't know Sophie had written anything. And she submitted it through the court's child advocate program. Sophie, would you like me to read this aloud? From the gallery, Sophie stood up. At 8 years old, she looked tiny but determined. Yes, please, Your Honor. Judge Crawford cleared her throat and began reading in Sophie's careful handwriting. My name is Sophie Parker, and I am 8 years old. I know my mom and dad are fighting about where I should live. I want to live with my dad, but not because I don't love my mom. I love her very much, but my dad has been happier since he met Mrs. Rodriguez and Emma and Ethan, and when he's happier, I'm happier too. Before, it was just me and Dad, and sometimes that felt lonely, even though he loves me. Now it feels like a real family. Emma and Ethan taught me that it's okay to be sad sometimes, because they're sad sometimes too about their papa dying, but we help each other feel better. Mrs. Rodriguez makes my dad smile the way he used to before the divorce, and she makes me feel like I'm special too, not just because I'm Dad's daughter, but because I'm me. I know some people think Dad shouldn't get married because he just met Mrs. Rodriguez, but sometimes the best things happen fast. Like when Emma and Ethan fixed Dad's car the first day we met them. They didn't need to think about it for a long time. They just saw something broken and fixed it. That's what Mrs. Rodriguez did for our family. She fixed the broken parts. Please don't make me move away from them. We all need each other now. The courtroom was silent except for the sound of someone crying. David realized it was Rachel, tears streaming down her face as she heard her daughter's words. Judge Crawford set down the letter and looked around the courtroom. I'll have my decision within the week. Court is adjourned. As they filed out, Rachel approached them in the hallway, her lawyer trailing behind, looking uncomfortable. David, she said quietly, can we talk? Privately? 5 minutes later, Rachel and David stood in an empty conference room, the weight of 8 years of marriage and 2 years of bitter divorce between them. She sounds happy, Rachel said finally. In that letter, Sophie sounds like the little girl she used to be, before we started fighting all the time. She is happy, David said carefully. I've been angry for so long, Rachel continued. Angry at you, at the divorce, at feeling like I failed as a wife and mother. When I heard you were getting remarried, it felt like you were moving on while I was still stuck. Rachel, I'm dropping the custody challenge, she said suddenly. Sophie belongs with you, with all of you apparently. I can see that now. David felt his knees nearly buckle with relief. Thank you. Don't thank me. I should never have put Sophie through this. I should never have tried to punish you for finding happiness. Rachel wiped her eyes. I just want to be part of her life, David. Not as someone fighting for custody, but as her mother. Of course, David said immediately. Maria and I would never try to keep you away from Sophie. Maria seems good for you, for Sophie, and those children of hers. In that letter, Sophie wrote about them like they were her siblings. They are, David said simply, in every way that matters. 3 months later, on a perfect June morning, David Parker married Maria Rodriguez in the backyard of their new home, a house they'd bought together, with enough bedrooms for all three children and a large garage where Carlos's tools had a place of honor. Emma and Ethan walked Maria down the aisle, while Sophie served as David's best woman, carrying the rings in a small wooden box David had made in Carlos's workshop. Rachel attended the ceremony, sitting beside Carmen and watching her daughter beam with pride as her two families finally became one. "Papa would have loved this," Emma whispered to Ethan as they watched their mother exchange vows with the man who'd become their father in every way but blood. "He did love this," Ethan replied with 7-year-old wisdom. "He sent Mr. Parker to us when his car broke down. Papa always said broken things were just waiting for the right person to fix them." In the audience, Judge Crawford, who'd become an unexpected friend to the family, smiled as she watched David promise to love and protect not just Maria, but the children who'd first brought them together by seeing a problem and refusing to walk away. As Maria and David kissed, sealing their promise to build something lasting from the broken pieces of their old lives, 9-year-old Sophie looked at her new siblings and grinned. "Now we're officially a family," she announced. "We always were," Emma corrected gently. "We just made it legal." And in the evening light, surrounded by the people who'd fought for their right to love each other, the Parker Rodriguez family celebrated not just a wedding, but the truth Carlos had taught his children from the beginning. The best repairs come from patient hands and caring hearts. And sometimes the most beautiful things are built from pieces that others might have thrown away.